Hello, I'm Robert, a fact checker and science blogger, and I help people who are scared of various things, and with our Doomsday Debunk group in Facebook. And this time I'm actually talking about more of a positive story. And this is about all the things we're doing that are going to help with get us to zero emissions aviation. At the moment we have about 2% of the global emissions of aviation, so it's not really it's important when we get all the way down to zero emissions. It's not really so important just now, as long as we starting to make some progress about it, and we can see where we're going. So this is a plan that NASA is not an actual plane. It's an artist's impression and a design for a plane. And the one thing you'll notice, its wings are very, very thin, very narrow, and it doesn't seem to have any propellers. They actually folded back. These are little. They should have propellers, but the propellers fold back after takeoff. Now the explanation of those two is that actually a narrow wing is much more efficient in cruise flight, apparently, but it doesn't give you enough liftoff to take off. So this ingenious idea is to put a whole lot of little electric motors along the wing, and then all the extra all the turbines then send much more air underneath the wings, which give it more liftoff. Faster wind motion means greater liftoff, and so it can take off even when its wings are too short for it. It wouldn't be able to take off without those. And then once it's in the air, then they all fold back and they feather down, and then these it's just the two propellers at the end that keep it going. I think it's 175 miles per hour it flies. And the combination of using electric motors and and this extra boost of the very narrow wings means it can be 5 times more efficient. And so that will greatly reduce the cost. And at this point it starts becoming something that you could consider for short flights of just a few miles in a city, like an airborne taxi. So we could have our airborne vehicles of the future actually being economically valid and viable, and we could actually have that flying around in our cities sometime in the not so distant future. And if so, that could really take off, and that could be, so we could actually have a lot more flight, and it would be zero emission flight for very short haul flights. And then for somewhat longer but still short haul, and that also could be used for longer flights as well, then there's this idea. So this is in Norway, and it's a very, very small test plane. Obviously this is not the final version, this is just a test plane, but and you have to look a little bit that they're very crowded inside. The two of them just crowded in, but eventually it's going to be a 6-seater, and it's going to fly around between the fjords in Norway, where being able to fly 6 people back and forth very frequently whenever you want will be quite a saving. So that's something we can build with present day technology. It's nothing that there's nothing really to stop it working. So that is going to be happening in Norway in the early 2020s. You can say that pretty confidently. And this is a similar one in the US, where you can have there's going to be short haul flights across the US in electric planes, and lots of small planes. Instead of a few big planes flying back and forth, you have lots and lots of small planes, each with just half a dozen or a dozen people inside. And so again, sort of like taxis in a way, but they'd be flying around in the big or small buses, flying around from place to place in the United States. And so that might well just completely take over short haul flight once this is well underway. And then now if you go and look at it, it's more challenging. So let's pick that up so it works well like that. So I'll take myself off the screen for a moment or two. So this explains how it works with the why we can already do electric short haul flight but not yet long haul. So this is the maximum takeoff mass, and this is the maximum takeoff cargo space, cargo capacity. And so hydrogen combustible hydrogen fuel cell, then they take a lot of space but they're not very heavy. pure electric is both. And for some reason, I'm not quite sure why the pure electric, if you happen to know, is being favoured over these, which sort of seem to make more sense because they're less weight. But anyway, for whatever reason, they're focusing on pure electric at the moment. And but now, if you go and look at long-haul flight, then there's much less. They've completely reduced the because it's much more. There's much less possibility of something overtaking. You see, the jet fuel is looking at much higher, as you'd expect, much higher percentage, both in volume and in mass. And then when you multiply up to these things, they're impossible, and they can't really be improved very much. And then the pure electric is way up there. So it looks as if the future of long-haul flight is going to be making the pure electric more efficient. And if you could make it a greater power density and volume reduction of both by about 5-fold, you could start getting, I mean, it's not much less than 5-fold, it's just sort of like 2-fold, so you just get them in there, but that means your plane is just pretty much all taken up by batteries. So you don't really want to do that, so it's got to come quite a bit further down. But a 5-fold reduction would do it. And 10-fold would be wonderful. Now, it does look, now there is this one possibility that's lithium air. And so if you go and click through, sadly there are quite a few problems with lithium air. So we click down, then then if you go and look at the working principle. So you get lithium in its solid form, and then you get the lithium positive ion. You have lithium positive ion reacting with oxygen with lithium oxide, and so it's got a lot of specific energy, but the problem is it's quite difficult to regenerate it, and various other problems with it. And see, so I think it's quite, I'm not sure if this is how recent it is, 2011, but it's quite good because it gives you some of the challenges back then. And so they've improved a fair bit over that. One of the problem, for instance, is also the lithium oxide is not electrochemically active, and it's, how do you then recharge them? And it's all the clogging effect of the lithium and the oxygen. But there are various other challenges. It's all very technical, and I forget it after I read it next. I'll have to get an idea and then I forget. But the lithium air batteries, they have not just one, but 4 or 5 different technical challenges that they have to kind of address, and but they are making progress at them. And so one estimate, they think that they may be possible to do it in 15 years. But is that optimistic? Is that feasible? Is it like nuclear fusion, where it's always 15 or 20 years in the future or something? So, but maybe we'll have that in the 2040s or something. Or maybe there's some big breakthrough and we have it earlier. So, but apart from that, then the only possibility for long-haul flight, is biofuel or other forms of dealing with fuel, of creating the fuel, creating jet fuel by other methods for the synthetic fuel. Now, there has been the aviation industry. Let's bring it up as a graph again. So now this is just a schematic indicative diagram. So I don't pay too much attention to so how much that is or whatever, but this is this indication of where we go with no action, because the flights are increasing, so we get more and more emissions. And then but they have already set an objective of carbon neutral growth from 2020 onwards. And this is part of how they're doing it. They're already doing a little bit of biofuel. I'll talk about one of those in a minute. And then their aim is a 50% reduction by 2050, and this is the aviation industry worldwide has committed to 50% reduction by 2050. So if you do fly, then you're with a good industry, which is climate friendly, Now, this is only 2% of global emissions. At the moment, right now, it's not a deal breaker. You don't have to feel you've got to stop and do something about aviation emissions in order to make the progress we need to do up to 2030. And really, nobody needs to feel they should stop flying. If you do a lot of flying, it'll be by far your biggest emission. But I mean, it's perfectly sensible to do that with offsetting. If you really feel strongly want to do something about it, you don't have to stop flying. You can do things like video conferencing and combining flights, and that'll help as well. But don't feel, unless you want to make a really strong point or something, then actually your other things like reducing waste and possibly eating less meat or more less land intensive and less grain intensive meat, and have more efficient devices around your home, insulating your house, all the various many things you can do in personal measures, and they are worth doing. And don't feel that because if you do flights that most of my carbon dioxide is blown on my flights, there's no point in doing anything else. That is all worth doing, because if we all globally, for instance, reduce food waste, that could make a huge difference to the world. And so feel you're part of a global thing. And so this is the last little bit. So 50% reduction of 2% would be 1%. And 1% of global emissions is a level that we can certainly offset. In fact, 2% we can offset it by other methods such as reforestation, reversing desertification, improved soil health, improving salt marshes, and then we don't actually have to do the biofuel carbon capture and emissions. In fact, it would actually be better to burn the biofuel in the planes rather than because the planes are going to be doing emissions anyway. But you can do that as well if you've got excess biofuel. So so that's how they plan to do it. You get to see what I sometimes between. I can't. How can I stop that? Can't. And that's the end. Yes. So that was Norway's thing, and this is another one in the United States. So short haul flights. Yes, we talked about all that. So I've talked about that. So now, and I talked about that, the aviation, so now this is about the biofuels, and this the first ever Qantas did the first sustainable flight from the US to Australia in 2018. This was quite interesting. It used Brassica carinata, which is a type of mustard seed, and it's planted off season, so in between when you've got your crops for your whenever it is, like it might be winter or whatever, whenever it is you haven't actually got, but some crops you do plant in winter, but whenever it is you haven't got your crops there, then you use this as a cover in between. And so it's a cover crop basically, and it reduces the erosion, conserves soil nutrients, is water efficient, gives them an extra income, and doesn't compete with crops. And then you can turn that into jet fuel. So that's one way. And then the various other ways that we can do this. We can produce the jet fuel from without competing with land being used for crops. Other way is agricultural waste and forestry waste and municipal waste. So there are quite a lot of ways that we can actually get our jet fuel. And they worked out, where's my little calculation, that they worked out that that's all about that. Yes, that they worked out that a sustainable mass of 70 up to 100 could be produced each year of biomass, and the total you would need for aviation, for all of aviation, would be 45. So it is actually feasible to cover all needs from aviation in 2050. So it is actually feasible if we did really scale up on biofuel and only using those kinds of sustainable biofuels, not competing with crops, you could go all the way down to zero just by doing that. If you prioritised aviation, and if you did everything that can be done. So then another way of doing it is with synthetic fuel. Let's find the synthetic fuel. So yes, here we are, synthetic fuels, and they cost more. The biofuels also cost more. That's a problem. Bio-based jet fuels might cost 2 times, 3 times fossil-based jet fuel, but they'll likely be reduced as because the fossil fuel is very large scale already, whereas biofuel is very low scale, it's quite small scale, and by mid-century it could be a cost benefit of less than 100% and perhaps much less. And remember, 2050 is when we're headed for zero emissions. That's when you want. It doesn't really matter so much now. What matters more is what the costs will be in 2050 when we want to go all the way down to zero emissions. At that point, your 1% from aviation is significant. Whereas at the moment, it's only 1% of everything. By then, if everything else has gone down and aviation is continuing, then your 1% might be 50%. Or even 100% of the emissions, but it probably wouldn't be 100% because there'd be other emissions that would need to be offset, like from steel or cement, but they can be maybe zero emission too by then. So as we get to 2050, then it would be more important, but then your production costs would be gone right down. It might even be equal with biofuels, if it was available. This is just a calculation that it could be cost be 80% cost. So the synthetic fuels this is now, and the cost penalty could be 80% for depending on the price of the renewable electricity. This can keep going down, and solar panels have gone down 4-fold in the last 8 years. Suppose it going down 2-fold again. That's pretty certain. Suppose it went down 4-fold in the next decade or something. Then that would be a considerable reduction, and would start making this much more feasible. And so we can certainly do it, but you would have a cost penalty, and total decarbonation at the moment would be 20%, at 20% of the cost of long haul flights. And it's not enough to have a major impact on overall living standards, because aviation is only 3% of global household consumption. But for someone who does frequent flyers, then a 20% increase in the cost of your flights is quite significant. So anyway, there's an awful lot going in. It's very positive. There's lots of positive stuff happening, and we don't know where it's headed. We can already map out a way. We could go all the way down to zero emissions with a bit of a cost penalty by 2050, and going down to half of current emissions is they've already committed to. And then so there's another idea for the synthetic fuel. And this is an idea, this is just something I'm suggesting, but it's an idea from Australia that they have this idea to have renewables, to have ammonia as a renewable fuel. The thing is that Australia has an absolutely vast amount of renewable potential. It's so sunny there, and the vast area with not many people, where you could have, it's one of the best places in the world for solar panels. And potentially, Australia has a 12 terawatts capacity. It's more than the entire installed electricity capacity of the world, potential for renewables. So there's this idea, but of course you can't just cover it and have 12 terawatts of power, unless we've got to make financial sense. Otherwise it's a very expensive thing to do. So, but the idea is that that's far more than they need. So this idea is that you increase the amount of renewables in Australia way beyond what the population needs. So at the moment you can do it with just producing the amount the population needs, and then you do load balancing. And nuclear is no good for load balancing, nor is coal. Gas is okay, but best of all is pumped hydro, because that gives you more than 80% round trip efficiency, and you do it by pumping the water up to store, letting it run down to recover the electricity, and you can store power in pumped hydro for weeks, months, years if you want, as long as you can reduce the evaporation and then use it when you want. So it's absolutely ideal for balancing renewables. And Australia has a vast capacity for pumped hydro storage. There's abandoned mines, for instance, and the deep shafts can be filled with water, and then you pump the water up to the surface or to an upper shaft if you want to do it to the surface, and then let it pour down again to get the power back. And you can also do it between two lakes, which you don't need to use dams for pumped hydro storage, or you can do it between a lake on the top of a cliff and the sea. So that is just a new thing that's just coming in. So Australia can just do that. But suppose that instead it pressed ahead and it vastly overproduced on its renewables, and it had vast solar farms, like the ones in China, but for population doesn't need them. And so then it wouldn't need to do the load balancing. It would have far too much power all the time, or very little load balancing. And instead, load balancing. I can't remember what it's called. The active. It's very fast, not just proper load balancing you have with other things. Very fast response to the fluctuations of renewables. But if you've got vast amounts of renewables and it's all going all the time, and wind power at night and so on, then it just has more electricity than it needs all the time. And then you could use that electricity to make, this idea is to use it to make ammonia. And this is a project that's actually being tested. It's actually in pilot plant kind of stage. And so the idea is to make ammonia. Well, you could make renewable jet fuel from it as well. I don't see why not. And so especially with the way the prices are dropping, then it's already, solar power is very competitive with coal in Australia. And if it drops now, let's say fourfold, which is not impossible, or even eightfold, if they find a way to do that. So I'm being rather speculative, so you can't count on this. Then this could be a very, make a lot of sense. But even just as it is, it just, remember, it's a little bit too expensive for synthetic fuels at the moment from power. So what they're saying, we had these figures up here, that's an 80% cost penalty at $20. I'm not quite sure what the actual figures are now, but so that's not so far. So just doubling in reducing by an extra doubling in the reducing the cost by a half over what they've got there. You're getting in the ballpark. So maybe that would be Australia's big export in the middle of the century. In the second half of the century would be synthetic fuel for jets, and there probably wouldn't be many cars by then. There'd be a lot of electrical vehicles, and but synthetic fuel for all sorts of things. That anything that actually needs it. Like another example are very high powered tractors. They're quite hard to do with electricity. Low power ones can be, but the very big heavy tractors, then they're quite difficult to do with electricity. Again, if you've got lithium air batteries, you can do them easily. The problem there is with a very big heavy tractor is that that it's a big nuisance to have to travel back to recharge so often, whereas you can just carry a petrol tank out to it and just fill it up with petrol because it's much less mass. So useful big heavy tractors and probably other things as well. Anyway, so now have I done everything? Oh yes, just one other thing: algal biofuels, and there's the possibility of eucalyptus oil. Just talk about eucalyptus oils. That they're genes of wild eucalyptus that breed new varieties that can be grown for jet fuel. So these would be much easier to process and they're pretty much jet fuel already. So the eucalyptus, of course, very fast-growing tree and common in the US, in Australia. And Australia is the native home, and it has something like 800 varieties of eucalyptus, which are mainly just found in Australia. And so they're actually using the genes of the wild eucalyptus in order to feed new varieties for jet fuel. And then, but the final example, I think, and this is another thing, could be a breakthrough, but we don't have it yet, and that's jet fuel from algae. So this was a big idea from 2005 to 2010, and you had about 4 or 5 different companies, but sadly nearly all of them folded up. I think there's only about one left that's still running, and the problem was it works absolutely brilliantly in the laboratory. The concept studies and everything seems to work just fine, but when you actually get to the nitty-gritty and the practicals of actually getting the fuel from the algae, then they ended up actually using more power to make the fuel, to extract the fuel, than you got from the fuel once you started burning it. And it was very difficult to crack that. And so the various things, so they're improving the algal variety, so they produce more lipids, and they're using new, more efficient ways of getting lipids from the algae, and these two things combined, then they're just edging forward, and sometime in the near future, then maybe we can go back to this idea of fuel from algae. So the advantage of algae is that they're quite a bit faster at turning the photosynthesis into the fuel. And so, but you still need quite a lot of ponds. But if you think about this as mainly for jet fuel, then it's much more feasible than if you're thinking of like replacing all the cars, all the gasoline in your cars. And so there could be, you're not talking about such a huge area of having lots of ponds for algae to turn into jet fuel. And then another thing that I don't mention here are the giant kelp farms. So I think I'll add a link to it at the end. So the giant kelp is a way of could be growing lots of seaweed, and that reverses acidification of the oceans, and that can be used as a source for biofuel, as well as being a source for food, because seaweed can be eaten, and as a place for fish and other things that can live in the kelp farms. So it's a multiple thing that could actually go floating originally in sheltered waters, but then eventually right out in the deeps of the deep ocean. So that's another possibility. And so I think that's everything. I think I've covered everything, and so hopefully that's a nice positive message that this is aviation is actually, people go on and on and on about, we've got to do something about aviation. Aviation is big bugbear, talking about the UK, and they're talking about the political parties in the UK, and they get asked in question time, what do you plan to do about aviation, and how are you going to stop expansion of the airports? But we don't really. It's not the problem at the moment. Not worldwide. 2%. That is not where we need to be focused. We need to be focused on this long term, but I think we could be very optimistic about this for 2040 onwards, when it's going to really matter. And even 2030 onwards, then it's very, very likely. I don't think we need to worry too much about what we can do with current technology. They have got a good road plan already with current technology down to 50%, and with increasing flights, we just don't need to worry about increasing flights of aviation at the moment. Just the natural increase of flights, and then this plan to reduce by 50% by 2050, and then all these innovations that we're going to bring in. And if by 2040 we haven't managed to do that and there's something going wrong, then we've got to think about maybe should we reduce the price. But I don't think it's likely that we're going to need to do that. And even if every country is produced, even if we've got lots of people doing lots of flying, just think worldwide. It's far more important to focus on things like food waste and recycling and more sustainable meat and reducing meat consumption slightly by 20%. That would make a huge difference as well, which doesn't need to mean everyone. It doesn't mean people going vegan. It just means having more of a Mediterranean diet, and that would make a big difference in further north countries, countries that have got big meat eaters, and this is happening as a natural way it is actually happening, that people are transitioning like that. And so there's so many things we can do. So don't worry about flying. If you want to, it's the biggest part of your personal CO2 budget, probably, if you're a frequent flyer. And you can consider things like combining flights. Like, if you're flying twice the same place in the same week or something, then maybe you don't have to do both those flights. You can do them both things in one flight, or and some element of video conferencing. But you can also remember that in the end, then it's going to be carbon offsetting. Did I say that? That aviation is going to be one of the regions, or one of the things that is, if it is still there, and the IPCC reports assume that it's still going to be there, and it best assumes it's still going to be there, and we're still going to have that 1 or 2% of aviation. If that is still the case, then we just offset it with the reforestation and soil improvement, salt marshes improvement, and we don't need to do the biofuel carbon capture and storage. And if a lot of biofuels goes to aviation, then great. And then there is biofuel capture and storage happening anyway. There are already pilot plants starting up, people are actually doing that. So that will be happening, but it isn't actually needed for the zero emissions by 2050 path, if we can continue with our steeply increasing our pledges in 2020 and 2025 and 2030 and so on. And actually, things look very optimistic, and I'm just trying to help some of these scared people by looking at just what's actually happening, what some of the positive things that are going on in the world. Lots of wonderful, wonderful things going on. And we're a very clever species, even though we have our blind spots, and sometimes we just miss things that seem obvious once you see them. But we can rise to the challenge as well. So I'm very optimistic, and I say this too. I'm very optimistic. Oh, I'm lost. I'll bring myself back to the picture. I'm very optimistic because things are going so well. You get all this. There's so much despair and gloom in the world on TV about climate change. I've just been debunking this thing about tipping points, and people are just saying, "Oh, everything's kaput. We've lost it. We've lost our entire carbon budget." And it wasn't very well argued at all, in my view. And excuse me, we don't need this. Just look realistically at the situation, soberly, carefully. We don't need to exaggerate this. This is what will actually help people to act are these positive stories like this. Look at what we're doing and what we can do. And this is just one example. There's so many things going on. And I would never have guessed, like say 5 years ago, I would never ever have guessed that we would be doing so much by now. It really is incredible. And this fast drop in the costs of renewables is really going to help things a lot. And I think we've got to keep going. We mustn't reduce our emission. It's good that we're continually increasing our ambition. If we do that, and there's plenty of people who are planning to do that, then things are looking very good for the future. We can't, not just lie back and just say, "Oh, everything's wonderful." We've got to keep going, and there are some things that are really, we need really a lot of care and attention, but we can do it.